The crayon was yellow, the color of a sun that felt like a distant memory. 8-year-old Lily gripped it so tightly her knuckles were white. The waxy cylinder a small solid anchor in a world that had become flimsy and uncertain. She wasn't drawing a sun. She was sketching the salt shaker, its glass facets catching the dull, fluorescent light of the Greasy Spoon diner. Her mother, Sarah, moved through the Sunday morning breakfast rush in a blur of blue uniform and exhaustion, her smile stretched thin but still present. For Lily, the diner booth by the window was both a prison and a watchtower. From here, she could see the cracked pavement of the parking lot, the dusty main street of Harmony Creek, and the endless stretch of highway that promised a world she could only imagine. It was a world where fathers didn't disappear in a storm of sirens and twisted metal, and mothers didn't have to work 2 shifts just to keep the lights on. Her focus drifted from the salt shaker to the world outside the plate glass. A line of motorcycles was parked near the entrance, gleaming machines of chrome and black leather that rumbled with a quiet power even in stillness. Their owners, 5 men dressed in worn denim and leather vests, sat 2 booths over. They didn't talk much, but their presence filled the room. They weren't like the loud, boisterous bikers who sometimes pass through town. These men were different. They moved with a kind of deliberate calm, their eyes missing nothing. The one they called Preacher sat facing the door, his coffee untouched. His face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder truths, but his eyes, when they had briefly met Lily's, were surprisingly gentle. They were here because of a man named Jake, a friend who had taken a job in Harmony Creek and then died in a construction accident a month ago. An accident that felt wrong. Lily's attention was snagged by movement near the lead motorcycle, Preacher's bike. A man in a crisp gray suit, a man everyone in town knew, was crouching beside it. Mr. Abernathy. He was the one who owned the company that had built the new municipal bridge, the one who always sponsored the town picnic and shook everyone's hand. He smiled on billboards promising progress and prosperity, but the smile he wore now in the relative privacy of the parking lot was not the one from the billboards. It was tight and thin, a predator's smile. He glanced around, his movements quick and furtive. From his pocket, he produced a small metallic tool. It glinted once in the weak morning light. Lily's crayon stopped moving. Her breath hitched in her throat. Mr. Abernathy's hand disappeared near the front wheel of the motorcycle. There was a faint, sharp sound, a metallic snap that was almost lost in the diner's ambient clatter. He straightened up, pocketed the tool, and smoothed his suit jacket. He scanned the diner's windows, his gaze sweeping past Lily's booth. For a heart-stopping second, their eyes almost met. Lily shrank back, pulling her drawing pad closer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He hadn't seen her. He turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building with the unhurried stride of a man who believed he was invisible. The world inside the diner continued, oblivious. The sizzle of bacon, the clink of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation. It all felt wrong, like a scene from a play where only she knew the set was about to collapse. The men in the booth were talking now, a low rumble of voices, discussing maps and routes. Preacher was tracing a line on a folded map with his finger. They were getting ready to leave. They would get on their bikes, and Preacher would get on his, and he would ride down the steep grade just outside of town, the one with the sharp curve at the bottom, the curve where you needed good brakes, the curve her father's truck had failed to make. Lily's blood ran cold. She looked at the man in the leather vest, at the quiet strength in his shoulders, and then at the empty space in the parking lot where Mr. Abernathy had stood. She saw a future vivid and terrible, of screeching tires and shattering metal. She saw another tangle of sirens and another life ending on the blacktop. Her father had taught her that silence in the face of wrong was a kind of lie. And Lily, who had been silent for months, knew she could not lie now. Lily's world had shrunk to the size of her small apartment, the walk to school, and this vinyl booth at the diner. Her father, a long-haul trucker with a laugh that could shake the windows, had been the sun in their small universe. He smelled of diesel and coffee and the promise of adventure. He would bring her back little souvenirs from the road, a snow globe from Chicago, a polished stone from Arizona. He taught her how to read a map, how to spot a red-tailed hawk, and how to tell when someone was telling the truth. "You look at their eyes, Lilybug," he'd say, tapping the corner of his own. "The truth lives there, and you listen to your gut. It never lies." His gut hadn't warned him about the faulty guardrail on the old county bridge during that freak autumn storm 6 months ago. The official report called it an accident, operator error, but her father was the best driver she knew. The system, a cold and faceless entity of paperwork and clipped phone calls, had offered condolences and a paltry insurance payout that barely covered the funeral. The town offered casseroles and pitying looks. And then everyone moved on, but Lily couldn't. The silence her father left behind was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered every room. Her mother, Sarah, fought against it with frantic energy. She picked up more shifts at the diner, her hands raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals, her face perpetually etched with a worry that deepened the lines around her eyes. They spoke less and less about him, the memory too, painful to touch. Instead, they spoke of bills and homework and whether the old car would start in the morning. Sarah's exhaustion was a constant humming beneath the surface of their lives. She was a good mother, a fierce protector, but she was drowning and Lily knew it. So Lily had learned to be quiet, to be small, to not be another problem to solve. She retreated into her drawings. On the cheap paper of her notebooks, she could control the world. She could draw her father back, smiling behind the wheel of his rig. She could draw a house with a big yard and a dog. She could draw a thick, strong, unbreakable guardrail on the county bridge. Her art teacher, Ms. Albright, was the only one who seemed to notice the change. She saw the detail in Lily's sketches, the unnerving precision with which she captured the world around her. She also saw the shadows under Lily's eyes and the way she no longer raised her hand in class. "You have a remarkable eye, Lily," Ms. Albright had told her just last week, holding up a drawing Lily had done of a wilting flower in the classroom window. "You see things other people miss." Lily had just shrugged. Seeing things didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a burden. She saw the cracks in the pavement, the sadness in her mother's smile, the way Mr. Abernathy's friendly wave never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. She saw the town of Harmony Creek not as a charming slice of Americana, but as a place of hidden fractures and quiet desperation, a community held together by politeness and a collective refusal to look too closely at the things that were broken. The system had failed her father. The insurance adjusters with their clipboards and legal jargon had reduced his life to a series of checkboxes. The town officials, including Mr. Abernathy, who had given a somber speech at the memorial, had promised to look into bridge safety and then promptly moved on to budget meetings and zoning disputes. Lily learned a hard lesson. The world was run by adults who didn't always see what was right in front of them, who were too busy, too tired, or too willing to accept the simplest explanation. They didn't look in the eyes. They didn't listen to their guts. And now, sitting in the diner, the smell of burnt coffee sharp in her nostrils, Lily felt that old, familiar gut feeling coiling in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had the day her father left for his last run, a quiet dread she couldn't name. The man in the suit, the man who was supposed to be a pillar of their community, had done something wrong, something dangerous, and the men on the motorcycles, strangers who were just passing through, were about to pay the price. The memory of her father's voice was a clear, steady bell in the fog of her fear. Silence is a kind of lie. The bell on the diner door had chimed an hour earlier, announcing an arrival that shifted the room's atmosphere. The Sentinels Motorcycle Club didn't enter like a storm. They entered like a tide. 5 men moving with an economy of motion that spoke of long-held discipline. They parked their bikes in a perfect staggered formation, a line of steel and leather that looked less like a random stop and more like a planned encampment. They chose the booth in the corner, the one with a clear view of the entire room and the entrance. The patches on their vests were simple, a stylized shield with a single watchful eye at its center. No screaming skulls or outlaw slogans. Their motto, stitched in stark white letters beneath the shield, was simple and absolute. Veritas vos liberabit. The truth will set you free. Their leader, the man they called Preacher, had the quiet intensity of a man who had seen the worst of the world and had chosen not to be broken by it. A former army chaplain who had lost his faith in institutions, but not in people. He had founded the Sentinels with a singular purpose, to find the truths that systems ignored. They were a brotherhood forged not in bars and brawls, but in the crucible of shared loss and a rigid moral code. Each member had a past that led them here. Doc, a former combat medic, carried a trauma kit that was better stocked than the town's small clinic, his hands as skilled at setting a bone as they were at tuning a carburetor. Wrench, a master mechanic who could diagnose an engine by its sound alone, had once built custom vehicles for government agencies that didn't officially exist. And Ghost, the youngest, a scout sniper who had come home from the desert with haunted eyes, could sit in a room for an hour and go completely unnoticed, his senses cataloging every detail. They were in Harmony Creek for Jake. He had been one of them, a prospect who had decided to settle down and take a job with Abernathy Construction. He was a meticulous man, a welder by trade, who believed in doing a job right or not at all. His weekly calls back to the club had started to sound strained. He'd mentioned cutting corners, shoddy materials on the new bridge project, and a boss, Mr. Abernathy, who was more interested in deadlines and profits than safety. Then, a month ago, a piece of heavy equipment had malfunctioned on a different site, and Jake was gone. The official report cited mechanical failure. The company had been cleared of any wrongdoing. The Sentinels didn't believe it. They had come to Harmony Creek not for revenge, but for the truth, for Jake. They had spent the last 2 days quietly asking questions, visiting the site and getting the lay of the land. They were a methodical, patient force, and they were starting to make people nervous. Preacher sipped his cold coffee. He had noticed the little girl in the window booth when they first came in. He had a daughter about her age, a lifetime ago. He recognized the look in her eyes, the quiet, watchful intelligence of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. She wasn't just coloring, she was observing, documenting her world with a focus that was rare and startling. He watched her mother, Sarah, rushing from table to table, the exhaustion clinging to her like a second skin. He saw the whole story in a single glance, a family struggling to stay afloat in the wake of a tragedy. It was a story he knew all too well. It was the kind of story that often intersected with men like Abernathy, men who built their empires on the broken lives of others. His gut, an instinct honed by years of reading people in the most extreme circumstances, told him they were in the right place. The truth about Jake was buried here, under layers of civic pride and polite denial. He just needed to find the loose thread that would unravel it all. He put a few bills on the table, more than enough to cover the check. "Let's ride," he said quietly. "Time to pay our respects at the bridge." His brothers nodded, rising as one. The quiet tide was about to go out. Lily's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. They were leaving. The men in leather were standing up, stretching their legs, their quiet conversation turning to the road ahead. Preacher was putting on his gloves, his movements slow and deliberate. Any second now he would walk out that door, climb onto his motorcycle, and ride toward a fate she had just seen being meticulously arranged by a man in a suit. Her mind screamed, but her voice was a trapped whisper in her throat. Fear was a cold, heavy hand clamped over her mouth. What could she possibly say? Who would believe an 8-year-old girl over the town's most respected businessman? She imagined the scene. Her, a small, trembling child, pointing a finger and babbling about a cut rope. The adults would smile condescendingly. Her mother would be embarrassed. Mr. Abernathy would laugh it off, his charming billboard smile firmly in place. Nothing would change. Except for everything. Her gaze fell on her drawing. The half-finished salt shaker sat on the page, stark and lonely. But in the corner of the paper, almost hidden, was another sketch she'd made from memory. A man's hand, a shiny tool, and a thin black line being severed. It was proof, but it was a child's proof. It wasn't enough. The image of her father's mangled truck, a picture she'd seen on the front page of the local paper, flashed in her mind. The twisted metal, the shattered glass, the finality of it. She couldn't let that happen again. Not if she could stop it. Her father's words echoed again, louder this time. You listen to your gut. It never lies. Her gut was screaming. Taking a shaky breath, Lily slid out of the booth. Her legs felt like lead. Every eye in the diner seemed to be on her as she crossed the small space separating her world from theirs. The men of the Sentinels paused, their conversation dying as this small child approached them. Preacher turned, his gentle eyes questioning. Lily stopped in front of him, her head barely reaching the shield patch on his vest. She looked up into the face of this stranger, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and hard-won wisdom. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. The fear was too strong. She tugged on the sleeve of his leather jacket instead, her small hand a point of startling vulnerability against the tough material. Preacher looked down at her hand, then back at her face. He saw the raw terror in her eyes, the desperate urgency. He saw the truth. He turned to his brothers, who were watching the exchange with silent curiosity. "Stop talking," he said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that cut through the diner's noise. The room seemed to grow quiet. He crouched down, bringing himself to her level. The smell of leather and road dust was overwhelming. "What is it, little one?" he asked, his voice softer than she could have imagined. "What did you see?" Lily finally found her voice, a small, trembling whisper that was almost swallowed by the pounding of her own heart. "The man," she breathed. "The man in the suit, Mr. Abernathy." She saw a flicker of recognition in Preacher's eyes. "He was outside, by your motorcycle, the front one." She swallowed hard, forcing the next words out. "He had a tool, a shiny one." He knelt down. She pointed toward the front wheel of his bike, visible through the window. "He cut the little black rope." It was a child's description, simple and direct. A brake line was a little black rope. It was the most honest and terrifying sentence Preacher had ever heard. The air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. Doc and Wrench exchanged a sharp, knowing glance. Ghost, who had been seemingly staring at the sugar dispenser, subtly shifted his position, his eyes now fixed on the front door, his posture changing from relaxed to ready. The truth, in the form of a child's whisper, had just been set free. A profound stillness settled over the Sentinels. Preacher's gaze remained locked on Lily's, his expression unreadable but for the sudden, hard set of his jaw. He didn't doubt her for a second. The terror in her eyes was too genuine, her description too specific. In his world, children and dogs didn't lie, and this child had just handed him the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't even fully assembled yet. He placed a large, calloused hand gently on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, the words imbued with a gravity that made them feel like a solemn vow. "You did a very brave thing." He stood up, his full height seeming to diminish the space in the diner. He looked at his brothers. No words were needed. Wrench was already heading for the door, his face a mask of cold fury. Doc lingered for a moment, his eyes on Lily and her mother, who was now rushing over, a look of confused alarm on her face. "What's going on? Lily, what did you do?" Sarah asked, her hand fluttering nervously to her daughter's hair. "I'm so sorry if she was bothering you." Preacher turned his steady gaze to Sarah. "She wasn't bothering us, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "In fact, she may have just saved my life." Sarah's eyes widened, her confusion deepening into fear. Outside, the scene unfolded with a chilling quiet. Preacher and Ghost followed Wrench into the parking lot. As if on cue, Mr. Abernathy reappeared from around the side of the building, a phone to his ear, feigning an important call. He saw the bikers gathered around Preacher's motorcycle, and his stride faltered for a fraction of a second before he composed himself, plastering his public relations smile back on his face. "Everything all right here, gentlemen?" he asked, his tone oozing manufactured concern. "Having some trouble with the bike?" Preacher stopped a few feet from him, positioning himself between Abernathy and the diner door. Ghost flanked him, a silent, imposing shadow. "Just admiring the local hospitality," Preacher said, his voice deceptively mild. Abernathy's smile tightened. "Well, Harmony Creek is a friendly town. We welcome visitors, as long as they're just passing through." The veiled threat was unmistakable. While they spoke, Wrench knelt by the front wheel, his examination swift and professional. He didn't need to search. He knew exactly what to look for. He ran a finger along the hydraulic brake line. His hand came away slick with brake fluid. He held up his fingers for Preacher to see. The clear, oily liquid was a death sentence on two wheels. He then pointed to the line itself. It wasn't frayed or worn. It was a clean, precise cut, angled in a way to be almost invisible on a casual inspection. It was sabotage, deliberate and potentially lethal. Wrench stood up, his eyes cold as steel, locking onto Abernathy. "Brake line's been severed," he stated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, which made it all the more menacing. Abernathy's facade finally cracked. A flicker of panic crossed his features before he quickly suppressed it. "Severed? That's terrible. Must be vandals. This town has had a problem with teenagers lately. Truly disgraceful." He shook his head, performing his civic outrage for an audience of three men who were not buying it for a second. "It's a clean cut," Preacher said, his voice dropping, losing its mildness and taking on the hard edge of command. "Made with a pair of side-cutting pliers. A man who works in construction would know that. A man in a hurry might even leave a small metal fragment behind." He took a slow step forward. Abernathy involuntarily took a step back. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The parking lot of the Greasy Spoon Diner had become a silent battleground. "A little girl in the diner saw a man in a suit kneeling right here," Preacher continued, his eyes boring into Abernathy. "She's a very good artist, draws what she sees. I wonder what she drew today." Abernathy's face went pale. The bluff had been called. The truth was out, lying there on the greasy pavement next to a pool of brake fluid. The Harmony Creek Police Department was a small two-room affair that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Detective Harding was a man in his late 50s, a local who had seen it all and was 2 years from retirement. His professional skepticism was a well-worn coat he put on every morning. When 5 members of a motorcycle club walked in, his skepticism hardened into outright suspicion. He listened to Preacher's story with a practiced patience, his face giving nothing away. Bikers, sabotage, a conspiracy theory involving the town's biggest benefactor. It sounded like something out of a bad movie. "So let me get this straight," Harding said, leaning back in his creaking chair. "You're accusing Councilman Abernathy of trying to murder you because a little girl said she saw him near your bike." "I'm telling you what happened," Preacher replied, his tone even. "And I'm telling you that the child who saw him is a credible witness." "She's 8 years old," Harding countered, his voice laced with disbelief. "Kids have active imaginations." It was then that Lily and Sarah arrived. Sarah had been terrified, but Preacher's quiet insistence and Lily's unwavering certainty had convinced her. She held Lily's hand, a protective lioness escorting her cub into a den of wolves. Lily clutched her drawing pad to her chest like a shield. Harding sighed, running a hand over his tired face. This was not how he wanted to spend his Sunday. "All right, honey," he said to Lily, his voice softer than it had been with the bikers. "Why don't you tell me what you saw?" Lily, emboldened by Preacher's belief in her, didn't flinch. She opened her drawing pad and laid it on Harding's cluttered desk. The first drawing was of the severed brake line, the little black rope with drops falling from it. The second was a sketch of a man in a suit kneeling by a motorcycle wheel. The drawing was simple, childlike, but the details were sharp. The man's face was mostly obscured, but one hand was clearly rendered. On his ring finger was a large, ornate ring. "He wore this," Lily said, pointing to the drawing. "It had a bird on it, like an eagle." Harding froze. He knew that ring. It was Abernathy's family signet ring, a gaudy piece of gold he wore everywhere, a symbol of his old money heritage. It was not something a child would invent. It was a detail only a witness would notice. The detective's skepticism began to crumble, replaced by a cold, unsettling feeling. He looked from the drawing to Preacher, then back to the small, serious girl. "I'll need to take this as evidence," Harding said, his tone shifting from dismissive to professional. He looked at Lily. "You did good, kid." His next call was to Ms. Albright, Lily's art teacher. He caught her at home, grading papers. "Lily Miller?" Ms. Albright said, concern in her voice. "Is she all right? She's been so withdrawn since her father passed. A wonderful, bright girl, but she's been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." Harding asked about her artwork. "Her work is meticulous," the teacher explained, "almost photorealistic in its attention to detail. If Lily drew something, it's because she saw it exactly that way. She doesn't invent things, detective. She documents them." The pieces were clicking into place. Harding felt a pit forming in his stomach. He had known Abernathy for years, played golf with him, endorsed him for counsel. The idea that he was capable of this was unthinkable, but the evidence, the cut line, the child's testimony, the corroboration of the ring was undeniable. He dispatched a forensics team to the diner parking lot. They found it, a tiny sliver of metal, almost invisible against the dark asphalt, right below the damaged brake line. It matched the high-end insulated pliers commonly used by electrical contractors, the kind of tool Abernathy's company bought by the case. The investigation had officially begun. The gears of the system, so often rusted by indifference or influence, were slowly, grudgingly beginning to turn. And it was all because one small, overlooked girl had refused to be silent. The sentinels didn't leave town. They checked into the local motel, their bikes parked in a neat row outside, a silent, watchful presence. They were no longer just visitors. They were now Lily's guardians, a leather-clad wall between her and a world that had suddenly become far more dangerous. News in a town like Harmony Creek travels faster than a wildfire. It starts with whispers over a fence, theories traded in the aisles of the grocery store, and culminates in front-page headlines in the local paper. The headline, "Prominent Councilman Questioned in Vehicle Tampering Incident," sent a shockwave through the community. The story was carefully worded, citing an ongoing investigation and an unnamed witness, but everyone knew. They knew it involved the bikers at the motel, and they knew the accused was Martin Abernathy, the man who was supposed to be the town's savior. The town fractured. On one side were Abernathy's staunch defenders. They saw him as a victim, a good man being targeted by dangerous outsiders. They looked at the Sentinels with fear and suspicion, seeing them not as protectors but as a threat to the town's peaceful image. Letters to the editor poured in, decrying the thugs and defending Abernathy's unimpeachable character. Sarah felt the chill of this division every time she went to work. Regulars who used to greet her with a warm smile now offered a curt nod or looked away entirely. Whispers followed her as she refilled coffee cups. "That's the mother," they'd say, putting her own daughter in the middle of it. For what? Attention? Money? The pressure was immense. She was scared, for Lily, for herself, for their future in the only home they'd ever known. But every time her resolve wavered, she would look at Lily, who met the world with a quiet, newfound courage. And then she would see the Sentinels. They were always there, not in an overt, threatening way, but as a steady, reassuring presence. When Sarah's car wouldn't start one morning, Wrench was there before she could even call a tow truck, fixing a faulty alternator with quiet efficiency. When a group of teenagers started loitering near their apartment, Ghost would appear from the shadows, his silent presence enough to make them move on. Doc checked in on them every day, bringing groceries and asking Lily about her drawings, treating her not as a witness but as a person. Preacher became their anchor. He would sit with Sarah at her small kitchen table after her shift, drinking coffee and just listening. He told her about Jake, about their mission for the truth. He explained that their code was simple. They protect the innocent and they see justice done. Abernathy didn't just cut a brake line, Preacher explained one evening, his voice low and serious. He tried to silence a truth he thought was buried. Jake knew something. We think he knew Abernathy's new bridge, the pride of Harmony Creek, is a death trap. He connected the dots for her. The shoddy materials Jake had mentioned, the rush to finish before the state inspectors arrived, and the most chilling connection of all, the old county bridge where Sarah's husband had died. It was Abernathy Construction that had won the contract for its repair and maintenance just a year before the collapse. It wasn't just about a cut brake line anymore. It was about a pattern of corruption that had already cost lives and threatened to cost more. The public reckoning came to a head at a tense town hall meeting. Abernathy, looking pale but defiant, took the podium to defend himself. He spoke of his love for the town, his commitment to its future. He painted himself as the victim of a malicious smear campaign orchestrated by violent outsiders. The crowd was on his side. His words met with applause. But then Detective Harding stood up at the back of the room. He didn't shout. He simply asked a series of calm, pointed questions. "Mr. Abernathy, can you explain why financial records show your company billed the county for high-grade steel reinforcements for the old bridge, but metallurgical reports from the wreckage show cheap, substandard alloy was used?" The room grew quiet. "Can you explain why your former site foreman, Jake Miller, made a call to a federal workplace safety hotline the day before his fatal accident?" The applause died. The seeds of doubt had been planted. The community, which had been so quick to judge, was finally being forced to look at the truth, and it was uglier than any of them could have imagined. In that crowded, stuffy room, the billboard image of Martin Abernathy began to crumble, revealing the predator beneath. The weight of evidence, once it began to accumulate, became an avalanche. Detective Harding, now fully invested, worked with a relentlessness that surprised everyone. He subpoenaed a decade of Abernathy's financial records, revealing a complex shell game of dummy corporations, inflated invoices, and kickbacks to state inspectors. The picture that emerged was one of systemic rot, of a man who had built a fortune by cutting corners on public safety. The sliver of metal from the parking lot was a perfect match to a pair of pliers found in Abernathy's car. The signet ring became an undeniable marker, placing him at the scene. But the most damning evidence came from the past. Harding reopened the investigation into the old bridge collapse. He found Lily's father's original accident report. The cause of death was the failure of a guardrail that had been documented as replaced and reinforced by Abernathy's company. The new forensic analysis proved it was the original corroded rail, painted over to look new. Abernathy hadn't just allowed Lily's father to die through negligence. He had actively covered it up. The motive for trying to silence Preacher became brutally clear. The Sentinels were not just investigating Jake's death. They were unknowingly pulling at a thread that could unravel Abernathy's entire criminal enterprise. The arrest was quiet. Harding and 2 deputies showed up at Abernathy's sprawling mansion at dawn, finding him in his silk bathrobe, sipping espresso. The bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated silence. The trial was a county-wide spectacle. The courtroom was packed every day. The Sentinels sat in the back row, a silent, leather-clad jury, their presence a constant reminder of the truth that had been brought to light. Abernathy's high-priced lawyers tried to paint Lily as an imaginative child, influenced by the bikers. They tried to portray the Sentinels as a violent gang with a grudge, but the physical evidence was irrefutable. The financial trail was undeniable. The pivotal moment came when Lily was called to the stand. Sarah walked her to the witness box, her hand a steady presence on her daughter's back. Lily looked small in the oversized chair. The prosecutor, a young woman with kind eyes, approached her gently. She didn't ask about brake lines or pliers. She asked Lily to show the court her drawing, an image of the sketch of Abernathy's hand. The one with the signet ring was projected onto a large screen for the jury to see. "Lily," the prosecutor asked, her voice soft, "can you tell the jury why you decided to warn the man with the motorcycle?" Lily looked not at the prosecutor, but at the jury. Her voice, though quiet, was clear and steady, filling the silent courtroom. "Because my dad taught me that you don't let people get hurt if you can stop it," she said. "He said that being quiet when you see something wrong is the same as telling a lie. I didn't want to lie anymore." It was devastating in its simplicity and honesty. There was no cross-examination. Even Abernathy's lawyer knew he couldn't touch it. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, fraud, involuntary manslaughter. As Abernathy was led away in handcuffs, his face ashen, a quiet sense of release settled over the courtroom. But justice wasn't just a verdict. It was the moment Sarah could finally look at her daughter and see not a victim of tragedy, but a hero. It was the quiet nod Preacher gave Detective Harding across the crowded room, a sign of respect between 2 very different men who had found common ground in the pursuit of truth. Justice had been delivered not by a single act, but by a chain of courage, a friend who spoke up, a child who saw, a brotherhood that listened, and a detective who dared to question the status quo. The system had responded slowly and imperfectly, but it had responded. The conviction of Martin Abernathy was not an end. It was a beginning. The shock waves of his downfall radiated through Harmony Creek and beyond, forcing a painful but necessary public cleansing. The federal investigation that spawned from Harding's initial inquiries uncovered a web of corruption that implicated 2 state inspectors and a regional zoning commissioner. Arrests followed, and with them, a complete overhaul of the state's public contract bidding and inspection processes. New whistleblower protection laws were fast-tracked through the state legislature, directly inspired by the story of Jake, the man who had tried to sound the alarm. The name of the new legislation was the Jake Miller Accountability Act. In Harmony Creek, the changes were more personal and profound. The new municipal bridge, Abernathy's supposed masterpiece, was subjected to a rigorous, independent structural analysis. The report was horrifying. It was found to have critical flaws in its support structure, built with substandard concrete and insufficient rebar. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. The bridge was closed, torn down, and rebuilt, this time correctly with transparent oversight and a citizens committee which Sarah was invited to join. A memorial plaque was installed at the entrance to the new bridge. It listed the names of all the victims of Abernathy's negligence, including Lily's father. His name was finally cleared, the operator error officially struck from the record and replaced with the truth. The Sentinels did not just ride away. They had become part of the town's fabric. They established a local chapter of Bikers Against Child Abuse, with Doc leading training sessions for teachers and parents on how to recognize signs of distress in children. Wrench started a free Saturday workshop for local teens, teaching them basic mechanics and engine repair, giving them a purpose and a place to belong. Their biggest legacy was the creation of the Sentinel Fund, a non-profit seeded with money from a civil settlement with Abernathy's seized assets. The fund was dedicated to supporting families who had lost a primary earner due to workplace negligence, ensuring no other family would have to face the same desperate struggle as Sarah and Lily. The Greasy Spoon Diner became an unofficial community center, a place where the old divisions had melted away. The bikers were no longer seen as outsiders. They were neighbors, guardians. The diner's profits soared, and Sarah was able to cut back her hours, finally having time to just be a mother. The ripple effects were tangible, creating a stronger, more honest, and safer community. The town had been forced to look into its dark corners, and by doing so, had found a new, brighter path forward. It was a legacy built not of steel and concrete, but of courage, truth, and the enduring strength of a chosen family. 1 year later, the late summer sun cast long, golden shadows across the town park. The air was warm, smelling of freshly cut grass and barbecue smoke from a nearby family picnic. Lily sat on a checkered blanket, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was no longer drawing broken things. Today she was drawing a family portrait. In the center were her and her mom, both smiling. Surrounding them, like a circle of protective mountains, were 5 men in leather vests. Preacher, Doc, Wrench, Ghost, and even Jake, drawn from a photograph, were all there, their faces rendered with a love and familiarity that went deeper than blood. Lily's silence was a distant memory. Now she was a chatterbox, her laughter a bright, happy sound that carried on the breeze. Sarah watched her from a nearby bench, sitting beside Preacher. They weren't talking, just sharing a comfortable silence, watching the child who had saved them all. The exhaustion was gone from Sarah's face, replaced by a deep, settled peace. Detective Harding, now just a few weeks from retirement, ambled over. He nodded at Preacher. "Just wanted to say thanks again," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You all woke this town up." "The little one woke us all up," Preacher corrected, his gaze soft as he watched Lily. A letter had arrived for Lily a week ago. It was from the governor, accompanied by a civilian medal for bravery. It sat on their mantelpiece, a small, shiny reminder of the big truth she had spoken. The Sentinel Fund had just awarded its first scholarship, allowing a local kid to go to college. The new bridge, strong and safe, now stood as a testament to integrity, its plaque glinting in the sun. The world was demonstrably better, safer, because someone had paid attention. As the afternoon light began to fade, the sentinels prepared to leave. They weren't saying goodbye, just see you later. They were family now, their visits a regular part of the rhythm of Lily and Sarah's lives. Lily ran up to Preacher as he straddled his bike, its chrome gleaming. She handed him her drawing. He took it carefully, his rough hands gentle with the fragile paper. He looked at the image of their chosen family, his eyes shining with an emotion he rarely showed. "This is the best map I've ever had," he said, his voice thick. He folded it carefully and placed it in the inside pocket of his vest, close to his heart. He put on his helmet and looked at Lily one last time. "Stay brave, little one." "Always," she promised, her smile radiant. The 5 bikes rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting thunder. They rode out of the park and down Main Street, heading toward the new bridge. Lily and Sarah stood on the grass, waving until the bikes were just small specks on the horizon, riding into the sunset. The world was still full of dangers and broken things, but here in this small town, a promise had been kept. A child was safe, a family was whole, and the truth, once freed, was riding on.